another, maybe just a bit, but I think maybe we can start, and I'll just slowly explain how we'll be working today. So if we could go to the next slide on the etiquette. So this evening, we're going to be in meeting function rather than webinar function to allow more interaction. That will give you some more options. By the way, I'm Hugh Thomas. I'm the director of the center. I'll be doing some brief announcements, then I'll turn it over to the presenters. And they'll talk a little bit, and then there'll be plenty of time for questions and interaction. We will want you to remain muted for the presentation portion. You can have your cameras on or off as you wish. You can place questions and comments in the chat, and you can also use the raise hand function and then unmute yourself to ask questions. So we'll be taking questions in various ways. If you choose to ask a question via the raise hand function, obviously you'll unmute, but you might also think about showing yourself if your house is not too messy and you feel comfortable. Any questions about that, you can go ahead and throw in the chat, and I'll answer them at the end of the announcements part. So if we could go on to the next slide. So these are just some upcoming things that the Center for the Humanities is a part of. Obviously the book fair is a much larger thing, including a number of faculty from UM, including in the humanities, Patricia Engel and Kai Miller from English, Michael Bustamante from history, Chantel Acevedo also from the English department, and we'll be sponsoring a couple of sessions. So you can look for details of that on our website. Next. On Thursday, we are co-sponsoring with the Low Art Gallery a talk that's in conjunction with the opening of a couple of exhibits on American Impressionism. And I think this is a very interesting talk about outsiders and participation in American art. Next. And then one of our many book talks this year, I think this is our 5th book talk this year, faculty book talk by Professor Butterman of the Modern Languages and Literature Department. Next. And then an exciting inaugural event. We've recently gotten an endowment for a lecture and other kinds of events program in Polish heritage. And the first of these is going to be on Friday, December 3rd at noon from about space travel and so forth by a prominent engineer at the NASA Center in Pasadena, who is from Poland himself. And next. So this is our tonight's.
Yeah, I didn't realize y'all have another game at 10.
Could we ask people to mute if you're not presenting? So I'm sure all of you are here because you know how problematic the job market for PhDs in academia has been for many years. And so one of the things at the center we try to do every year is to talk about different opportunities beyond the kind of traditional teaching and research, because PhDs have so much to offer and can succeed in so many fields. So the downside is you may not want to get the job that you came in thinking about, but there are plenty of other opportunities. And tonight we'll be talking about career opportunities in university administration with three administrators at UM. So I'll turn it over to my assistant director, Christina Larson, to start the introductions.
Thank you, Hugh, and thanks for highlighting the upcoming programs that the center has been involved with. So I'm Christina Larson, as Hugh said, Assistant Director for the Center for the Humanities. Tonight I'll be co-presenting with Roxane Pickens, who's the Director of the Learning Commons, UM Libraries, and also the Director of American Studies in the College of Arts and Sciences. And then also Maryann Tobin, who's Assistant Dean in the College of Arts and Sciences. So to kick us off, I thought I'd share with you just a little comic strip from the Family Circus. This is Jeffy, and Jeffy is very, very tired after having a dream of running here and there and everywhere, you know, not going in a straight line, but sort of exploring. And this is a common theme in the Family Circus for Jeffy, who, you know, takes the winding path home from school, etc. But I thought I'd start with this comic strip and with this idea that a career is rarely a straight line. You know, sometimes, you know, people will go to, you know, college and say, I want to be a nurse, or I want to be a doctor, or I want to be an engineer. And so sometimes those pathways are straight, but sometimes the lessons learned by sort of navigating, you know, sort of a creative career path, sometimes those are very rewarding as well. The second thought that I wanted to sort of introduce to you is, what is your something else? So this question was asked to me in my postdoc position at the Toledo Museum of Art. I was an Andrew W. Mellon Fellow there for 2 years as a leadership fellowship. And I just finished, you know, my PhD in 2015, and you know, and the director, then Brian Kennedy, you know, said, hey, you know, it's great that you're here. A lot of us have PhDs, but what is your something else? So I think, you know, as graduate students, so often, you know, you're focused on your dissertation, on your coursework, your qualifying exams, et cetera, that, you know, your focus becomes, you become an expert in your field, but your focus becomes very narrow. So it's sometimes good to step back and think about, you know, what is your something else? What in your background sort of gives you, you know, a different perspective than, say, another person. So my something else was that I had a background working for an arts program in a hospital setting, and so and then my family are nurses. So I ended up helping with a program for patients with Alzheimer's or dementia and their caregivers in a museum setting. So you know, having that angle or having that experience gave me an opportunity to, you know, to work creatively within that position. So just think about that for a moment, and you know, hopefully that resonates with you. In terms of the objectives for this evening, these are the main ones. So we'd like you to learn about additional opportunities and career paths for, you know, once you get a doctoral degree, to gain insights from our experiences and careers. Maryann and Roxanne and I, you know, all have pretty diverse careers. Discuss navigating a wide field of study, a specific dissertation topic in the job market. So, you know, how do you use your dissertation topic? You know, how do you navigate or use that when it's time to go in the job market? And, you know, how can you be flexible with that too? And finally, focusing on roles as educators and the skill set that's developed from the PhD process. So, again, you might become an expert in one specific aspect of the field, but, the skill set that you gain through the PhD process is definitely transferable to other positions, even, outside, being a college professor. So this is kind of the timing for this evening. The first 25 minutes or so will be introductions and overviews of our own careers. And then we'll have a panelist discussion for about 40 minutes. And then we'd love to hear from you, your questions, and sort of have a dialogue for the last 25 minutes. All right, so that's sort of my brief overview to this evening's presentation or this evening's workshop. So I'd like to turn the mic over to my colleague, Roxane Pickens, and she's going to give you an overview of her PhD and career experience.
All right. Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me. And thank you for your time today. Again, my name is Roxane Pickens, and I'm currently the director of the Learning Commons at Libraries, which is housed mostly in Richter Library. That's where I'm based. I'm also serving as the director of the American Studies program in the College of Arts and Sciences. And in both of those instances, administrative work is a large part of what I do. My PhD is in American Studies, which is an interdisciplinary field that trained me to be flexible, collegial, adaptable, and creative. And those are the four kind of skill sets that that I really lean on in my in my work, and what I think really helped me to move into the kind of administrative work that I do at the university. My dissertation was a study of the relationship between festivity, especially social parties, and representations of African-American identity in Jazz Age and Harlem Renaissance literature and visual culture. I basically tried to take the song "Ain't We Got Fun" from the 1920s and see if it could tell me something about the way that people at the time played with racialized identity in expressive culture. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about the rhetorics of culture and cultural expressions, and I see this throughout my everyday life. Philosophically speaking, I think career can be a cultural expression. It's a series of actions and artifacts that make us coherent to ourselves and to each other. And career is relational in the way that culture is relational. So in a really broad sense, I'm never very far from the spirit of my graduate work, even when my day-to-day work takes me into, sort of organizing and operational and logistical, tasks. But I'm definitely at a distance from where I thought it would be. I've always worked in higher education, and my first full-time job was right after undergraduate. I was an administrative assistant at the university where I was studying. And then I went to graduate school. I did that job for about 2 years. And then I went to graduate school in American Studies. My second full-time job, between the graduate work, was here at University of Miami as a lecturer. I came here as a lecturer in writing in the English department, and I started that in 2007. And in late 2017, after I finished my doctorate, I transitioned into a new position with the Learning Commons at Libraries. So this is my 15th year working here at University of Miami. I will say that, leaving aside the specific titles that I've held over time here at I absolutely like to see myself as an educator, and I think that that opens up possibilities and career paths. So I think I'm going to go ahead and stop there and turn it over to our next presenter, who I believe is Maryann.
Yes, hi. Thank you, everyone. I'm so happy to be here with you all this evening. My name is Maryann Tobin. As Christina mentioned, I'm the Assistant Dean for Professional Education and Personalized Learning at the College of Arts and Sciences. So my title is a bit of a mouthful, but to give you a little background on me, I have had a path very similar to the cartoon that Christina shared just a minute ago. I am a undergraduate graduate of the University of Miami. I got my Bachelor of Arts here at the College of Arts and Sciences. And then I went into a teaching career. My bachelor's is in education and English. So I took those two double majors into the K-12 setting, and I was a high school English teacher. That is my passion. That was, if you asked 10-year-old Maryann what she wanted to be when she grew up, was a high school English teacher. And I fancied myself, I guess, Robin Williams in Dead Poets Society, probably saw that movie one too many times, and that was the dream. And when I got there, I was at a Title I school. I actually taught at the high school that I attended, so I do that a lot. I don't stray far from home. But when I went back to teach at my alma mater high school, I was floored with the amount of students that would come into my English class and my language arts class. And they were struggling on the standardized test because as 10th, 11th, and 12th graders, they still had issues with the basic functions of reading and writing, phonics and vocabulary that many elementary school students struggle with. And this is a problem that's endemic across the US. So I decided I was going to go back to graduate school and do my part to fix it. So I went back to UM. I have a master's and a PhD, both from UM. So I'm a triple cane, which we'll talk about later, why that's frowned upon typically in academia. But I did it anyway. So my master's is actually in fine arts. I have an MFA in screenwriting from the School of Communication because initially I wanted to kind of teach the children to write. And I was looking for any way to improve myself as a writer so I could go back to the classroom armed with skills to teach writing. And then I stayed and I realized, well, it's not just writing, it's reading too. So my PhD is in literacy education, teaching and learning from UM School of Ed. And my dissertation was kind of a blend of my love of film and my love of language arts. And I studied digital storytelling as a cultural historical activity and the effects of participating in digital storytelling on vocabulary comprehension and semiotics in struggling adolescent readers. I had no intention of staying in academia. I remember very clearly in my admissions interview telling everyone I was going back to the K-12 classroom. I'm just here to get some more knowledge, and then I'm going to go back and fix America's reading problem. And I didn't do that. I had the opportunity to teach at UM when my dissertation chair was on sabbatical, and that got me hooked. And I realized instead of going back to the K-12 setting, I could stay here and I could teach teachers. So upon graduation, I became a professor of education, and I taught at Nova Southeastern University in Fort Lauderdale for 8 years. And I loved it. I loved higher ed. I still, obviously, I'm still in it. But I'm sort of a one-trick pony, and I have to be really invested in the place where I'm at. And as much as I enjoyed my time at NSU and I learned a lot, and I felt like what I was doing was teaching teachers, and whatever I did in my classroom was implemented in a K-12 setting the next day and really made a difference in the children. So that pay it forward filled me a lot, but I missed UM. And when I was a student here, I fell deeply in love with this crazy place. And when I saw an opportunity to come back to UM in the position that I'm currently in, I interviewed and I took it. I'll tell you my interview story later. But I began as executive director of programs, and I get to work very closely with Roxanne as director of American Studies. Now I oversee all of the interdisciplinary and professional programs of the college. I work very closely with Dean Bacchus, and you'll hear more about me later. I'm honored to be here.
Thanks so much, Maryann. I guess it's my turn, process of elimination. Yeah, my path has been winding, just like that cartoon that I shared with you all. I remember going to, I think, the Career Services Center at University of Iowa when I was an undergrad, and I was contemplating majoring in art history. But I wanted to be responsible. I said, okay, if I'm going to major in art history, what is my career path? Went there, and old school me, went to the shelf and picked up a book, and in that book it said, careers in art history, and it listed curator. So I thought, okay, if I play my cards right, if I do my undergrad, eventually go to graduate school, then I'll be a curator. That was my train of thought. And I have done some curation, curating of exhibitions along the way, but that never happened. I never became that full-time curator. But I kept my options open. So after graduating from University of Iowa, I worked in sort of museums and a hospital arts program for about 5 years, different places, and then went to graduate school at Case Western Reserve in Cleveland, Ohio. And it was in close proximity to the Cleveland Museum of Art. And eventually I interned there for an exhibition. And then the real pivot, though, was when I was hired half-time in a fellowship in academic programs. And so with the museum world, there's kind of municipal museums and then there's academic museums. And so that experience exposed me to sort of what I, thought that or something that I grew to love that I didn't know that I loved, which is museums oftentimes cater to K through 12. The logistics of working with college students, just isn't always feasible. Timing, distance, those kind of things. But I grew to really love that work, working sort of in a museum setting, but with academic individuals. So I already mentioned that after I finished my PhD in 2015, did a postdoc in Toledo Museum of Art. Did not do academic programs there. I wanted to, but it just wasn't in the cards. But after that, I started looking for academic programs positions and found one at University of Miami. I was another sort of postdoc position between the Low Art Museum and University of Miami Libraries. So that was my first post for 4 years. So I started in November 2017. And it's been a very enriching experience, to again be in that museum or library setting, but sort of in an administrative role. And so having that PhD, not all museums, for academic programs, not all museums require PhDs for that position, but having the PhD, really set me up to work collaboratively with faculty members who, of course, many of whom have doctoral degrees. So anyway, grant-funded positions are a blessing and a curse. They're a blessing in that you get to work on some really creative projects like I did in Toledo and then again here at University of Miami. But the curse is that they end, eventually the funding runs out. And so luckily a position had opened up at the Center for the Humanities. And so I applied for that, and it was, even though it wasn't a museum position, it was definitely in line in terms of programming and in my interest in working alongside faculty and students, et cetera. So anyway, that's my sort of long, winding pathway to how I, made my way from Iowa to Cleveland to Toledo to Miami. So anyway, I'll sort of leave it there. But now we're going to sort of segue into the discussion portion of tonight's workshop. So the first question and either Maryann or Roxanne, you can answer this question. I can answer it too. But what was it that attracted you to an administrative role within a university setting?
Roxanne, would you like me to go first? Sure. Well, as I mentioned, specifically this role, for me, it was a homecoming. It was coming back to I never thought I'd be an administrator. Even when I was still teaching high school, I didn't have a desire to be a department chairperson. But when I was at Nova, I was teaching, and I was just, I don't know, I was just scrolling one day, kind of saying, what's going on at UM? Let me look around. And this position popped up, and it really stood out because it was very different. It's not a typical administrator role within academia. And it really gave me a chance to keep my heart where it belongs. I love curriculum. I love what's new and what's next. Even for my dissertation, I had my PhD in 2009. So something like digital storytelling was new and cool then. Now everybody who owns a phone is a digital storyteller. But back in 2009, I was really on the cutting edge, let me tell you. So I've always been fascinated with what's next. And unfortunately, and this is a subject matter for another time, in the K-12 setting, there's not a lot of academic freedom. You're very stifled with the curriculum that is presented to you by the district or by the state. So this was an opportunity to innovate. Roxanne kind of alluded to that before. My favorite part of my job is that I have really no rules to my job description. I'm constantly being asked to come up with new programs or make connections between two faculty members or two departments or two schools and colleges where there might not be connections. Last year, I spearheaded the launch of the Masters of Science in Data Science, and I know zero about data science. Well, maybe now I know this much about data science, but it involved bringing together faculty from 8 different schools and colleges, and I loved it. And it was a gigantic headache, but it was glorious because it was this, exchange of ideas that, here I just thought it was going to be a bunch of math and computer science courses, and it ended up being a lot more. So that opportunity was a lot more, I guess, freer than I was used to in K-12 education. I was also really lucky because in this position, they were looking for someone specifically who could speak, the faculty language. And I had come from being a faculty member for almost 10 years at a university, teaching at the graduate level. I had doctoral students myself. And because I brought that to the table, coupled with the, being a triple cane, I mentioned earlier, that's typically something that is a bit of a handicap when you are graduating and you're trying to shop yourself around because you're seen as someone who has not really experienced academic life anywhere else except a single setting. I joke that I went to 3 different colleges, but I really went to the College of Arts and Sciences, the School of Communication, and the School of Education, which are all within, half a square block of one another. But what drew me to this and what I found as maybe the greatest asset is because I was an alum, I am an alum, and because I had it showed an investment in the institution, that kind of became a source of capital. So what I've managed to take what would be in the larger academic world as, somewhat of a handicap in my experience. I found a place where that was valued, and I came in to the college still able to work with professors that knew me as a student. The College of Arts and Sciences is the largest academic unit. So if you can come in and the names of all 20 departments and the department chairs, and you don't have to go through and feel like you're constantly learning that there's a little bit of momentum from the get-go because I knew the university pretty well. So I guess what attracted me to the role was I saw a place where things that might seem hindrances actually were valued. And still are valued. And I'm very grateful for that. I would recommend that, when you're looking for any job, try to really put yourself in the position, and this I think will help. I know it's questions later, but help with the interview process to already bring to the table why it's important for you. I'd never let anyone say, oh, well, you went to the same school 3 times. I'm like, yeah, I know the school like the back of my hand. So, what would you like to know? And I kind of came into the interview selling myself as an asset, and it worked because I got the job. So yeah, that's what attracted me to this role, and it's become my dream job. So I'm very glad to still be here.
Roxanne, how about you?
All right. Well, let's see. So I work in the Learning Commons, and for those of you who may be new to that that initiative, it is a collaboration, a cross-campus collaboration between libraries, units within the libraries, and other academic support services across the university. And we work basically to offer students, both largely undergraduates because they're our largest population, but also graduate students, faculty and staff, really anyone who comes into the libraries. We work to support them with their scholarly and creative needs, essentially. And so, as you can imagine, working within the libraries and working with a cross-campus collaboration, that appealed to me when the position, and I started as an assistant director of the an inaugural assistant director of the Learning Commons. I was attracted to the what I saw as an interdisciplinary framework for that particular project. So it was basically an opportunity to support students or to support people at the institution with their learning and with their growth and development, and to do so in a way from many different vantage points. And so as someone who was coming out of an interdisciplinary field, I was already attuned and had been trained to think really broadly and flexibly, and also, and this is the most important thing, to make connections between ideas, and that impulse to make connections really carried over into my just sort of soft skill set, and so that I was very interested in connecting with people. And so the administrative work of the Learning Commons was attractive because I felt like it gave me a bit of a practical, a sort of practice of working in an interdisciplinary context, working with people from different areas, trying to figure out together how we might support student learning, which is one of our most important objectives. And so so that was just really appealing to me in this context. I would also say that being, because I didn't have as narrow a methodological focus, and was, with my work, thinking about big pictures and trying to answer, sort of big, interesting questions, and using many different frameworks to help answer those great big questions. It occurred to me that administrative work might also be a way to practice that, right? So you're kind of looking at a structure and trying to figure out how to support the operations of that and keep people kind of working together. And so there's it just felt like there was a way that that again the work of being at the Learning Commons would really fit these kind of different, unique skill sets that I was gaining from my research, or the work in the field. And then the other thing that finally, and probably the most simple answer, is that it appealed to me to be working at a libraries. Libraries are historically our friends. They exist. When Christina mentioned museums as having sort of municipal, context and also academic context, libraries are the same thing. They are environments where all people are welcome, and welcome to do really interesting intellectual work, as well as interesting community work. And so it appealed to me to have an opportunity to work in that context too, and that was unique.
Thanks, Roxanne. I'll also mention sort of my, why I was attracted to an administrative role. So focusing on my current role at the Center for the Humanities, context is everything, so I've always been a humanities person. Undergrad, I was art history and English were my majors, and then museum studies was another. And then eventually went on for my master's and PhD in art history. But Iowa City, was where I went to school, and it was very rich in terms of the arts and the humanities, and it really fostered things that I loved, reading and plays and music and all those things. In terms of choosing an administrative role, it just kind of comes naturally to me. So we talked a little bit just briefly about at the beginning with objectives, sort of how our PhD process allows us to sort of grow other skills. And so, thinking back to writing my dissertation, thinking back to Zotero and, all those sort of footnotes and endnotes and, and keeping organized in terms of bibliography, that type of organization, or that experience of organization, I think has allowed me to be very organized as in my administrative role at the Center for the Humanities. And then also, I think, in my previous grant-funded position with Libraries and below. And then also, something else that I enjoy is sort of navigating and collaborating. So, in an administrative role, you're oftentimes collaborating with others. You're not, sort of running your own, sole book, or you're not just leading your course, but you're oftentimes working closely and collaboratively with other people, and that's something that I have always really enjoyed, and this role allows me to do just that. So next question is, what challenges have you faced in sort of pursuing, this line of work after your PhD?
Well, I can go first on that.
Sure, go ahead.
Go for it.
Okay. So I was someone who was surprised during the doctoral process to discover how generative and important it was that there's the philosophy part of the PhD. And so I got to where I was really sort of I really appreciated that, taking philosophical stances and thinking through some of the questions that I was looking at in my research. So, and I spent a very long time doing that. I came to University of Miami in 2007, like I said, and I actually was basically just at the start of writing that dissertation. So I was not finished when I didn't have the doctorate in hand. I had my master's, but I didn't have the doctorate in hand. And so, so I worked on my dissertation while working full-time. And having a family with small children. So, so it took me a very long time to get to the, to finish that degree. And so that meant that I spent a very long time thinking kind of philosophically about all kinds of things. And I would have to say that, one of my challenges in the role that I have now is balancing having that, 30,000 foot perspective on, on the implications of what it is that we're doing, balancing that with really the ground level practicality of getting things done in the role, and really working through whatever the needs are, whatever the problems are with the role, whatever the opportunities that present themselves. And so I would have to say, like, really keeping grounded, but doing so in a way that doesn't limit that. I think that higher level thinking is really important, and can set you apart. So the way you're thinking about big ideas can impact the work that you're doing in these kinds of roles. So I would say that's a challenge, like keeping that sort of perspective balanced. I think the other thing that has been kind of challenging is being in it's working with lots of different people. And so even though I really treasure collaboration and collegiality, I recognize that it takes a lot of work. It's a lot of work to invest in the relationships that are necessary to keep a community going and to build that culture that you're working toward. And so so it can be, when you're doing doctoral work, when you are able to be a scholar, a lot of the way that that's practiced in the US, it can be very isolating. And so, and that can be, a pleasure and a curse too. And so, so I think, kind of breaking out of that mentality and sort of recognizing that it's really important to reach out and to connect to different people, and to share, or recognize that there's a range of expertise that can be brought to bear on the work that you're doing, is really important. I think the other thing that happens is we can think of ourselves, when you're having done this kind of graduate work as, well, I'm the smartest person in the room. And well, actually, there are lots of really, really smart people. We all work with incredibly smart people. We all have different skill sets, and we need all of them to do the work that we need to do. We go farther together, right? The adage says. So so I think, there's a little bit of like ego control that you're, going to want to think through too, in this kind of environment. And then the final thing that I would say that has been a challenge is that I am working in a context where there aren't as many people with doctoral degrees. And so, so kind of, so it's a little bit related, like sort of navigating, again, the way that I'm thinking through problems and ideas and the way that others think through problems and ideas, and making sure that there's not this sense of, superiority around, having that degree. I mean, I think in higher education, it's incredibly hierarchical. And so we can sometimes really invest in that, in that sense of superiority around the, degrees that we have. And it's really good to kind of shift that and focus instead on, what are the objectives we're trying to reach? What are we all trying to do together to get us farther? So, yeah.
That was great, Roxanne. I'm piggybacking on that, since you kind of referenced the hierarchy that's at a university, typically, particularly an R1 institution. That is, I would say, a challenge. large colleges can be very fragmented and siloed. So a huge challenge is getting information, sharing information. It's a good challenge. It's not a negative because as you said, it brings people together and there are lots of opportunities for collaboration, but there is a culture of, stigma for being non-faculty. I'm not a faculty member. I don't have a tenure line. And even within the faculty hierarchy, you have tenured and non-tenured positions. And yes, I'm not going to lie, there are instances where you might feel like that you have to work a little harder to earn everyone's respect. But once you do, it's like you found this little pearl. The position that I have, I oversee all of the interdisciplinary programs, but I'm not a program director. I provide the administrative support. And the best analogy I usually give people is, I'm the maitre d', but the faculty member is the executive chef. And, I'm just there to show you to your seat. They cook all the food that you love and talk about the rest of the time. So I love that role. I love kind of being the concierge of these programs. And I kind of found a nice little spot where I feel that I have earned respect for the degree that I have and where I got it. When I was at NSU, I was one among a group that had R1 PhDs, so that was highly valued, and that was a nice position to be in. So also know your setting wherever you end up, like kind of figure out where you have your capital, I guess, and try to make opportunities out of that benefit you and benefit the work that you want to do. Because I have a background as a curricularist, even in K-12, when you do curriculum development, and I have experience doing online curriculum development as well, that was valued. So it's not something that, I'm not in an academic field that's represented in the college. So, it's not like I have a PhD in history and, could have opportunities to teach within the college. But I do have something else that I don't think anyone else in the college has, and that is this background in critical pedagogy. So I found a way to use that, to find avenues of that being an advantageous background. But yeah, I would say, yes, it is a challenge to be non-faculty, but it also gives me insight into the staff. I think I have a wonderful staff of 6 people, and they, I'm one of them. So you exist in this sort of really cool place that kind of is part academic and part, in the trenches, in the staff trenches, I should say, to be more specific. And it really lets you create the best of both worlds. And so I don't ever feel that I did myself a disservice by not pursuing a tenured position. I have colleagues that did that graduated in my cohort, and they're very happy where they're at. The institution I taught at was not a teaching college. There was no tenure granted at NSU. And I don't regret that. I have no regrets. I wrote when I wanted to write. I presented when I wanted to present. I didn't have the pressure of doing that. But I did it a lot, but certainly not to the standard that many of my colleagues that have the positions have to earn tenure. And I was very happy with that. My hat's off to Roxanne. I had no children and was not married when I got my doctorate. I got married right after and started my family, and I couldn't imagine going through the tenure process chasing after 2 toddlers. So it's finding the right balance for you at that moment in your life, and finding what fulfills you intellectually wherever you land, I think is kind of the key. And I have absolutely no regrets that I didn't pursue that, even though some people, especially my chair, might have been initially disappointed with my decision. He came to terms with it and is, I hope, very proud of me. Anyway, Christina?
Yeah, sure. I was just going to touch briefly on what both Roxanne and Maryann touched upon, which is this hierarchy within, a university setting. I think the danger or the challenge is sort of feeling like I'm second fiddle, to faculty who are tenure track, or even, lecturers, or, library faculty, I feel like sometimes I feel like I'm second fiddle, but then I step back and I realize that no, these faculty members, they want to collaborate with me. They want to, create a connection with me or relationship, with me. So, just getting past that is really important. And I felt that, also with the Mellon, the academic programs position that I held with the Low and libraries, the danger is again, feeling like you're second fiddle, but then you realize that you're there to collaborate with other very creative people, and that there's sort of a beauty in being able to navigate the university and work not just with one department, but with several departments. And I'm able to do that also with the Center for the Humanities, several departments within the humanities disciplines. So anyway, there's pros and cons to everything, and so it's good to sort of step back and realize that I'm not a supporting role, that I'm a collaborator, and it's an important distinction to make, I think. Next question. What opportunities and career paths are out there for those with doctoral degrees, and how do you find them? I think this is an important question. I think this is probably the question that most people wanted us to answer. So,
well, it's funny. We just kind of, had a few moments talking about how, there's this hierarchy within academia. And, the beauty of earning a PhD is when you step off the campus, there is a mystique in the outside world. It's like, wow, you have a doctor, so for every moment that you might feel like, well, I'm here on the university campus, but I'm surrounded by all these geniuses and everybody's got a PhD, you could go out into the rest of the world, and you've earned this amazing credential, feat, climb this mountain, whatever you want to picture it, that not still to, even though there's a prevalence of doctoral programs out there, you still have something that most people don't have, and take that with you wherever. So if you are looking around at jobs, or you foresee, other places, Roxanne and Christina have already mentioned museums, libraries, the government sector, policy, research, private schools. If you are at all interested in teaching, take a couple years and look at your local preparatory private school. Oh my gosh, they will treat you like a king, queen, duke, emperor, whatever rank you want to assign yourself. They love advanced degrees in a private school. And it's a really good place to get, to feel nourished, like you are. I always feel that way when I teach, that, I've put all this work into this degree, and it's not just for me, it's for my students or the people that I work with. And I get to use that to share. So I would absolutely say, it's not all about, and if your dream is to be a tenured faculty member, by all means, don't let go and do whatever it takes to get there, but also be mindful that there are places where your PhD holds, a lot of value, and you can take those kinds of positions and still adjunct on the side, especially online, given the last couple of years, there are a lot of online positions out there. I would encourage you to teach any way and as much as you can, even if it is at the K-12 level, because to me, and my value, and when I look at candidates that apply for positions, any teaching experience is of value to me. In fact, 2 of the people that work on my staff are also former teachers. I'm like, okay, well, this person can teach, which means they are organized, creative, they can deal with multiple people of multiple backgrounds, people with varying ability levels, they can convey information, they can speak publicly, they can communicate in written form. All of those soft skills, the minute you say, oh, I taught, it's like bingo, you've ticked a dozen boxes right there. So I would say teach as much or in as many ways as you can. So be very multimodal in your teaching experience. And yeah, I mean, just understand that you are engaged in something that is it's the highest level, and you've earned it. If you're a student at UM, which I imagine many of you are earning it at a top institution, and that has value everywhere. So, you know, look for the places where you find that will be valued and useful.
Oh, Roxanne, do you have anything else to add?
Yes. So one of the things that I discovered in transitioning into a library job is that I actually have librarian tendencies, and so as it turns out, and so I was trying to listen to things that Maryann was sharing, and also compile perhaps some lists to share with you in the chat. And so I'm actually gonna do that right now, just to give you a few just a few ideas. So so if you're thinking about there are a lot of really interesting ways, I think, to do, you know, what's called alt-ac, you know, alternative academic positions. Uh, you know, one thing that there's been in the last few years, a lot of traction around encouraging academics to develop LinkedIn profiles, because we know that many people are, as Maryann said, like, you know, in a lot of different fields and industries, they recognize the skill set that comes from doing deep study attached to a graduate degree are skills that would absolutely benefit their company, their you know, organization, their industry. And so so that's one thing. If you haven't already kind of considered having a LinkedIn profile, that might be something, because again, I think that it's becoming more and more accepted for folks who are coming out of academia to have that. But a few other things that I'm going to share here are so one is just from something that I'm aware of in the library field, is the Council on Library and Information Resources. It's the CLIR, CLIR is their the acronym. And the CLIR program has a range of postdoctoral programs that will accept graduate or doctoral students, or well, not students, but graduates, people with their doctorates from a variety of different humanistic fields, and give them opportunities to work in library and related settings. And so that they can kind of gain new knowledge and new skill sets. And so so I encourage you, if you are interested in libraries, and in particular academic libraries, that might be a source to look for. I think in more broadly, if you're interested in, I would say that not exclusively, but a lot of nonprofit fields are very open and understanding to the kind of skill sets that emerge from graduate work. And so I put Idealist as one job search site that you can you know, register for, and they have all kinds of positions, researcher positions or other kinds of positions that again see the skills that you gain from doing extensive doctoral study, and can deploy that in some different you know, contexts. And then the final place, which is a blog that is incredibly irreverent, but I think very useful, is a website the professor is in. And this is run by a woman by the name of, I believe it's Karen, yeah, Karen Kelsey. And she's a doctor, she has a doctorate and worked in higher education, tenured position, and left it. And she now dedicates herself to helping faculty. Well, she both helps faculty who are trying to advance and have a different kind of experience in the academy, but she also helps people transition out of the academy and gives a lot of advice for folks searching for that alternative academic alt-act position. And so it's a really, she's, like I said, she's super irreverent. She's overall, on all the social media. And I find that she tends to highlight opportunities and perspectives that would be really helpful for people thinking outside of the very traditional, I'm going to be a scholar in this particular field. So those are the three that I would recommend. And I'm seeing Maryann has put in Higher Ed Jobs as another site that's really good for identifying different positions. And then the Chronicle of Higher Education, which you can get a subscription to for free. You can also access it through the libraries for free. That's a really good site to keep tabs on too, also for alt-act positions, because again, many organizations, especially nonprofit organizations, are advertising in the Chronicle because they're looking exactly for your skill set.
If I can add too, and thank you for encouraging me to do a little quick homework, Roxanne. The nice thing about the Chronicle is it really has its finger on the pulse of education. So even as you're looking for if you stay in academia and you're looking for administrative type positions, it really it keeps you up to date with what different institutions are doing, both positive and negative, to maybe weigh in on your decision when looking for a career. Also, I can't echo enough what Roxanne said about LinkedIn. I would even go so far as prepare when you have a CV, but I would have a regular old one-page resume as well, because when you're interviewing outside of academia, the CV is many pages that they don't want to read, don't always care about, doesn't always make sense to them. So deprogram yourself a little bit if you're looking outside the academy. And have just a regular resume as well, and be on LinkedIn, because the University of Miami and many other universities have started to cross-post jobs from the Chronicle Higher Ed Jobs and to LinkedIn Jobs. So having a good LinkedIn profile and being active on LinkedIn, you will start to see jobs pop up that apply or that are automatically looking for someone with advanced degrees. And then that's also, later in your career, or well, earlier as well, that's where headhunters will find you. So if there's, an elite private school or a nonprofit or anybody in between that specifically works with an agency to find PhDs and the people who do this kind of work, they will look for you on LinkedIn. So I would absolutely recommend doing that if you haven't done so already, and keeping that more of your, if you want to think of your brain as, you have the academic stuff, and then you have a professional portfolio that you would fill on LinkedIn.
Yeah, thanks, Maryann and Roxanne. I'll second that, or third that, I guess. LinkedIn, I think, when I finished my PhD in 2015, LinkedIn, I think I had a profile, but I didn't really know what to do with it. And since then, it's become kind of a go-to thing for hiring, et cetera. Sort of backing up a little bit to what Maryann was saying before, to get those education or teaching opportunities if possible. I'm grateful to Maryann and to Roxanne. They both sort of helped me along in terms of sort of just teaching one class, American history, and what that class allows me to do, or American art history, is to take it, use a lot of the material that I learned in graduate school and share it with young minds. And even though I'm not a full-time professor, it's allowed me to sort of dabble back into my roots, and do something that not that I don't love the administrative work, but it allowed me to feel, to pay it forward, in some sense. So I'm grateful for that. It's a class that I've taught, I think, 3 times so far, online course. So I'm grateful to you both for helping me with that. So I think last question that we'll talk about, and then we'll open it up to you all for your questions and comments. And this is kind of like the $1 million question. How do you balance your specific dissertation topic, the wider field, and the labor market? So anyway, I don't know if Roxanne or Maryann want to jump in first, but it is an important question because, as doctoral students, you're told to come up with original research, original dissertation topic, but then how do you go out onto the labor market and make that relevant, or how do you sort of nuance that? So anyway, that's the big question.
I don't mind going first because I don't. The answer is I don't. So as I mentioned, I come from the sort of social sciences background. Research is a little bit different from those of you that are in the humanities. And frankly, as I said, I picked something that was very cutting edge at the time. Doing research in a K-12 setting adds additional layers of institutional review because you're working with minors. So it's a little bit more like medical research in that respect. And if you lose your access to a setting to do that research or to continue that research, you got a big problem. So on top of that, every setting is rife with challenges, both big and small. And what happened to me is I dove headfirst into teaching. Quite obviously, that was my love. And I didn't continue to research as much as I probably should have to stay relevant. And quickly, the technology that I studied got away from me. So I joke that my dissertation has expired. But what I did do at the big request of my chair is immediately following my graduating, I didn't stop, and I took my dissertation and started to split it up into chapters, which is, I know, very common in educational research. So I have a handful of book chapters that are out there, and I was able to go back and do a follow-up study with the same, I studied 6th graders, so I did a follow-up study 6 years later when they were seniors, and that was very enriching. And that's really the last time that I've gone into the classroom setting and done research with human subjects. That being said, once I felt that the well was dry, as far as book chapters and presentations were concerned, I just let my focus shift. And the academic endeavors that I've done since then, my scholarly interests have changed because I'm in higher ed. So I've done publications and presentations related to my current work. I am charged with developing new programs, some successful, some maybe not as successful, and that's data. Coming from my background in mixed methods research, I've been able to, kind of use that to, continue to be somewhat active in the scholarly world. So I would say, your dissertation topic especially right now, feels like your magnum opus, but it's not. It's that foundation that you will base the next thing on, and then the next thing after that. So what I took from my dissertation, aside from meeting 50 wonderful 6th graders, is the act of research and the act of writing and publishing. And then I use that. That's what really I carried with me beyond the content matter. Just because for me, the technology shifted so quickly. But as we've alluded to, you are building a portfolio of these essential skills that really are more, almost at the end of the day, more important. Yes, your dissertation that you and your publications are critical, but when you go out into the labor market, that's really what people want to see is, how well do you write? How well do you communicate? How well can you research? How organized are you with your time? And you're, presenting that to the world. So, you take your dissertation and run with it, but also be wary that your focus will change over time. Sometimes by necessity and some just, by curiosity, and that's a good thing. So I encourage you to be open-minded if you're nearer to the end of the process, look for avenues to continue to publish, but then also look for avenues to evolve into the next thing that interests you.
That is great. Thank you, Mary. And all of those ideas, and especially being mindful of the need to be flexible and to adapt and evolve, right? Like that, what you're saying is very much, is very important. Just give yourselves the room to grow, right? And to recognize that there's going to be growth throughout the work that you do, and none of the work is wasted, right? Like none of it is wasted. It all is in the service of giving you new ways of thinking, new ways of being, and new ways of connecting with others. And so I encourage you, even, wherever you are in your stage, but especially if you're in the earlier parts of your degree program, to feel comfortable and confident in the work that you're doing, and trust that there is going to be application. The work that you're doing is going to count, it's going to connect. And you may need to be very creative about how it does that, but it is going to do that, and especially if you approach it again with that flexibility, that creativity, that in a more practical sense, a sense of you being a public scholar, right? Like you're practicing to share out and to connect with others. And I also echo what Maryann was saying about conferences, presentations, opportunities for shorter papers. That's really a great way to balance your unique scholarly work, the wider field, and to, with an eye toward the labor market. I definitely think conferences are, they're like mini school. That's how I sort of approach them. And so I really appreciate being able to go to conferences and to attend them, even if it's in a virtual context, because that gives you a lay of the land in your field, so to speak, and it gives you that sense of connection to the scholarly work that you were interested in. But I tell you, every conference is thinking about the labor market, and every conference is thinking about how do we connect this to another industry, to another field. How do we make this generative, right, for everyone? And so I think that's an interesting site to be able to do that work. So yeah, I'll just kind of end there.
Yeah, I'll sort of respond to both Maryann and to Roxanne in saying that with the dissertation, I remember thinking of it as a marathon, that I'm going to get the prize, I'm going to finish the dissertation, get the prize, and then the next step is the career. But you got to enjoy the ride, right? So sort of focusing on the process rather than on the prize, I think, is key. Because if you just focus on finishing, it's important to finish your dissertation, but the process is where the learning happens. And so, and learning not just for your field, but sort of for your career as a whole. So just want to sort of leave you with that. We'll now take questions. So there's, If you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself and or comments. We'd like to hear from you. And if you don't want to unmute yourself, you're welcome to put a question or a comment in the chat.
One of my dissertation committee members used to say, in fact, I think it is still on his email signature under his name. It says, the best dissertation is a done dissertation. I was like, so finish, please. Don't get sucked into the black hole. You can do it.
I have a question about how much did you use the career services of your institution, and how much is networking? Because I get the feeling that it's going to be like 99% networking and maybe 1%, Tupple Career Center in UM context.
Oh, you're exactly right, Jose. I have to say I didn't visit Topple at all after my undergrad career. Because they have to service such a large population. Is there feedback? I don't know if that's me or not. They have to service such a large population that it's really focused on undergraduate needs. So it's absolutely not, I didn't go to Topple of my own choice. It is 100% networking. And I would say do that as often as possible. Right, if with the people that you went to school with. I'm still the person that I wrote most of my things with. We still collaborate on various things. And it is because of her that I even found out about the job at NSU. So I would say, seek out networking opportunities and seek out collaborative opportunities. Talk to your chair about the people that they know at other institutions, and reach out to fellow doctoral students at other institutions studying the same thing, and start to build that professional network. Make very good friends with a statistician, even if you're in the humanities. You never know, you always need a statistician, and good ones are hard to find. Yeah, that's it. That's actually my number one tip, is know a very good statistician who will run numbers for you. I think that's that's probably number one tip.
I'll say too, and I see, Lillian, that you also posted the question about how important networking was in getting the job or interviewing versus out of the blue. And so, Maryann said, what I was going to say too, it's super important. Networking is really critical, because it's a way that you learn the opportunities that are out there. And so how you approach that networking, Maryann also gave lots of different great recommendations on how to do that. Kind of going back to what I was saying before, I know lots of people use conferences as a way to build networks and things. And I would have to say, like, I make that recommendation even as someone who is pretty introverted, and only really has to make an effort to be, kind of social butterfly, even though I actually, I study parties and think a lot about social interactions. But even from that vantage point of as someone who struggles with making those connections, I found that even at conferences, it's always, there's usually an opportunity to build those links. Maybe they're small, maybe you only connect to a few people, 1 or 2 or 3 people, but you keep that up, right? It's like a friendship, so you continue the correspondence or what have you. So it's really, I think it's an important thing. It's especially important if your pursuit of a career is location bound. And so one of the things that I was experiencing was that my family was here, my kids were in school. I was not interested in becoming the kind of itinerant scholar that the field, the industry, education, higher ed industry demands of people right now. And I think, yeah, I have words about that, but anyway, so I was very location bound, and so that meant that I needed to be really creative, and open to opportunities, which is why I sort of, came to see myself as, okay, if I'm interested in being an educator, then I can do that in a variety of different ways, right? Like that opens up for me, just sort of mentally. And so combining that with the networking, right, with being able to talk to people in many different environments, can be the key to getting a position.
I'll provide sort of a concrete example, my own, which is I'm the assistant director for the Center for Humanities because of a networking story. So colleague Dr. Meg Homer was the previous assistant director. She contacted me in August, inviting me to co-present at this workshop, but said that she would be leaving. And so anyway, I applied for the position and the rest is history, but I had reached out to her initially in my previous position. And we had shared ideas about working with faculty, and we collaborated that way. So she knew me. She knew me in various circles. We attended. I attended a number of Center for Humanities programs, and so because of that connection, she had reached out to me, and so here I am. But the position at the Low and libraries, that wasn't out of the blue sort of thing. That was, Lillian had asked about out of the blue versus networking. So it's a mix of both, but I made this decision that I really wanted to stay at University of Miami. And so networking and knowing the faculty and knowing administrators and things like that was important. And it worked. So, but I was genuine about it. It wasn't like I was, just trying to network just to network. Meg was a colleague, and so like I said, here I am. But Maryann, go ahead.
I was going to say, I can give kind of the perspective of an administrator who's been fortunate enough to hire staff, but I consider all of my staff, fellow university administrators. And, I, like you, I think we all have been the benefit at some point in our job getting life of having an inside track or someone who could help get your resume off the pile, so to speak. So I would encourage you to take every opportunity. And I can speak as someone who's hired people who have been a connection of, somebody or a colleague of somebody. If I've got a job posting out there and someone from another unit or another school says, hey, would you do me a favor? I worked with so-and-so here. Would you give them a courtesy interview? I will always say yes. And I would say more often than not, that person is a finalist or gets a really hard look for me because I trust my connection not to steer me wrong. So yeah, it is that integral and it's really organic. I like what Christina said about being very authentic about your networking. You're not busking to get people to come to your Broadway show. You're trying to make the connections that are meaningful in your academic life and your intellectual fulfillment, but also, can help connect the dots down the road, because these types of positions are not easy to find and they are also not obvious. So, if I might have passed my initial job description as executive director of programs off as being, too administrative or too much about budgets and, strategic planning and, all other kinds of things, I might not have given it a second glance if it wasn't at UM. And then I called a friend and said, hey, I hear College of Arts and Sciences is hiring. And they told me the whole story about, the new dean, and he had a lot of interdisciplinary energy. And so I got a little bit of background information from my little birdies that gave me some insight before I went into my interview. And when I did go in for my interview, I felt super prepared. I was also had the luxury of, I wasn't as desperate for the job because I had a job. And I think that really helped because I kind of went in and told the college, they were specific to online learning we were talking about at the time. And I was like, you guys are very late. I think I actually said, you're way late to the party, which I can't believe they hired me because it's such a millennial thing to say. But I have a very vivid memory of going, you guys are way late to the party. And they hired me anyway, who knew? But because I had an insight into the strategic priorities of the institution and the position specifically. So the more, even if it's just Google stalking, the more information you can gather to prepare yourself for the interview, it's like a type of networking that you've generated yourself. And I would absolutely encourage that. Go in prepared, but authentically prepared. Again, you're not a salesperson. If you really want the job, then that will come across in the way that you've prepared yourself for an interview and what you've gleaned from the presence of the institution, online or otherwise, to help you feel, because you want to be the right fit. The last thing you want is to go in and you get it seems like a really great job, but they want something totally different from you than your expectation was. So, getting that out in an interview as well, particularly since these are not faculty positions. Faculty positions, there's kind of a set expectation, and it's a lot of based on reputation and publications and experience. Well, there's not a lot of ground rules sometimes for these other positions. So knowing their expectation and what you bring to the table and having that marriage happen is really key, and that's what will eventually get you the job. So do your homework going in for sure.
Thanks, Maryann. We have just a few more minutes left, so anybody in the audience have other questions that you'd like to ask?
Hi, good evening. I don't have a question. I just wanted to say thank you all so much. Shout out to School of Education, Maryann. I'm getting my PhD in kinesiology, so I'm a student in the School of Ed, and yeah, thank you all so much for your words. LinkedIn is definitely useful. I'm slowly but surely just like looking and browsing. I plan on graduating in May with my PhD, so it's difficult. I don't want to start applying too early either because I still have one semester to go, and so yeah, it's your advice. All of your advice has been useful. So just thank you so much to all of you. I may just bring coffee to your offices and just chat with you all. You have so much to say. It's amazing. Thank you so much.
Well, I'm so glad the fellow School of Ed. It's such a special place, and I will cherish like every moment that I walked those old Merrick building always. And I had an office when I was a postdoc for a year with a colleague of mine, and we were both in an office, quote unquote, air quotes, because we found out that it was actually a closet, and it was so tight in there that in order for me to get into my desk, she had to step out, and then she got pregnant, so she really had to step out, and then I would like climb over her. We're very close. We've published a lot together. But yeah, I love those times there. But you said something, so I can't help but comment. It's never too early to apply because the job market is a shark's tank out there. So I would, I know you're finishing your dissertation, which is the most important thing right now. But if you see a job that is at all, remotely interesting, I would send the application because, don't take a job until you're done, but you can always say, especially if they're looking for PhDs, they will recognize that you are intending to graduate in May, you're this far along, you'll be available June 1 or whatever. And, more often than not, they might wait for you because they really want you. So yeah, I wouldn't delay applying. Don't tell your chair I said that though.
No, yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I'll type and I'm available too. I'm in the Camposano building, which is that kind of historical looking building that's next to physics. It looks like it belongs in the Keys. You can come by anytime. I'm in Camposano 215.
Yeah, I'll second Maryann in that, some of the administrative or, some of these, in my experience, museum jobs, it takes about 6 months, the hiring process from the moment that you apply until, you're at your desk at the new job. So I think Maryann's correct, and, apply for what looks interesting to you. And to see what happens, but it does take time. So just keep that in mind.
It does, and they won't get back to you. I mean, you'll apply to, I'm sure you all have experienced some of this already. You'll apply and you won't even get the courtesy of a, hey, we received your application. Thanks so much. And then weeks will go by and you're waiting and waiting, and then you'll get the, sorry, the position's been filled email. And you don't even know if you've got a second look. So yeah, that kind of cycles back to why networking is so important, because even if you have someone who's already at that institution or has some insight, they might say, oh yeah, they're already interviewing, or, oh, it's too, you've missed the deadline, or something like that, because there is such a saturated market right now. It is hard to get back to a lot of people, and it's not their intention to be professionally rude, but sometimes you don't get a reply at all. And you don't want to also hold out thinking that they're just, waiting for the phone to ring. I would continue to apply to anything that looks interesting. And the right one will come up for sure.
I thought of one other thing. So we've talked about LinkedIn. One thing that I did a few years ago was to develop my own portfolio on Squarespace. So it's my own personal website in a way that I can highlight, programs that I've overseen. Anyway, it's a very visual sort of thing, but that might be another option depending on which department or which field you're in. But just a thought.
And Roxanne just said the best resource of all, which is the Writing Center.
Right.
And TOPL too. I didn't want to dissuade you from going to TOPL Career Center, especially if you want to put together a resume along with your vita, or you've really never interviewed before. Even though you're a graduate student, they have phenomenal workshops on interviewing that would be really helpful. So do take advantage of TOPL if you feel the need, but not to steal Roxanne's comment, but yeah, the Writing Center is amazing. It's fantastic. I would absolutely recommend to use that. Yeah. And that there's TOPL as well, Hurricane. You will find, because we're all in different fields, so you'll find the resources that make the most sense for you, and do take advantage of them throughout. And like I said, stay in touch. I joke about making friends with a statistician, but later on, if you have to write a grant and you have to put a budget together, you're going to call your numbers friend to help you. So definitely keep your contacts. If you get a new phone, save all your contacts. You never know who you might need.
Very good. Well, I think we're, just at time. So Maryann, Roxanne, thank you for joining us tonight. Audience members, thank you for your questions and for joining us. You have our names. You can find us, I think, if you have further questions. So again, thank you all for joining us. And I truly hope that this was helpful in helping you navigate sort of post-PhD. So have a good evening and take care.